1990, Iraq invades Kuwait, and the world watches. The US leads a massive coalition, unleashing airstrikes so intense they light up the desert sky. Tanks roll, missiles fly, and high-tech warfare changes the game overnight. It's lightning fast, high stakes, and broadcast live into living rooms around the world. Saddam thought he could hold Kuwait, but the coalition hits back hard, and the war ends almost as quickly as it began. Buckle up, because this is modern warfare in overdrive. The Cold War was ending, and the world was shifting into a new age of power. The Soviet Union was collapsing, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and the world believed peace was finally within reach. But in the heart of the Middle East, another kind of storm was brewing, one born not of ideology, but of ambition. Iraq, a nation forged through years of conflict and ruled by an iron hand, was led by Saddam Hussein, a man whose hunger for dominance was matched only by his ruthlessness. Fresh from an 8-year war with Iran, Iraq stood bloodied but proud, armed to the teeth and desperate for recovery. The war had drained its economy, left millions dead, and buried the nation under billions in debt. Yet Saddam believed he had emerged victorious, a regional power that deserved recognition, respect, and wealth. But respect was not enough. Iraq was drowning financially, its oil revenues plummeting, and its once loyal allies growing distant. Across its southern border lay Kuwait, a small but oil-rich kingdom whose wells pumped more black gold than Iraq could dream of. To Saddam, Kuwait wasn't just a neighbor, it was the key to survival. He accused Kuwait of economic warfare, of overproducing oil and driving down global prices to keep Iraq weak. Old border disputes flared to life, and whispers spread that Saddam's patience was running out. The United States, still savoring its Cold War victory, watched from afar. Washington viewed Iraq as a necessary counterbalance to Iran's revolutionary zeal, unaware that its former ally was preparing for something far more dangerous. As Iraqi troops massed near the Kuwaiti border, diplomats scrambled to calm the growing tension. But Saddam wasn't a man of words. He was a man of action, one who believed fear was the purest form of respect. The world had barely exhaled from decades of nuclear brinkmanship when, in the summer of 1990, the desert once again echoed with the sound of engines, marching boots, and the rattle of tanks. The storm that was coming would redraw the map of power, redefine modern warfare, and mark the moment America's role as global enforcer became undeniable. The Gulf War was about to begin. Saddam Hussein's path to this moment was carved through decades of violence, ambition, and control. Born in the dusty village of Al-Auja near Tikrit, he rose from obscurity to become the face of Iraq's Ba'ath Party, a man shaped by hardship and paranoia. His climb to power was ruthless, eliminating rivals with precision, ensuring absolute loyalty through fear. By the 1980s, Saddam had built one of the largest militaries in the world, armed with Soviet tanks, Western technology, and chemical weapons used without hesitation during the brutal Iran-Iraq War. That war, meant to secure Iraq's dominance, left the nation economically shattered. Oil fields burned, infrastructure crumbled, and millions of Iraqi soldiers returned home to poverty. The regime's propaganda called it victory, but behind the speeches lay desperation. Saddam owed billions to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, nations that had once bankrolled his fight against Iran. Now, they refused to forgive his debts. His pride turned to fury. He accused Kuwait of stealing oil from the Rumaila field along their shared border, claiming billions in lost revenue. He also claimed Kuwait's excess oil production violated OPEC limits, collapsing prices and strangling Iraq's recovery. Diplomacy turned to threats. By July 1990, Saddam summoned Arab leaders, demanding Kuwait cancel Iraq's debt and cede territory he claimed as historically Iraqi. The Kuwaitis refused, trusting that no Arab leader would attack a fellow Arab state. But Saddam believed history favored the bold. In private meetings, he told his generals that Kuwait's riches were rightfully Iraq's, and its independence was an insult. Iraqi troops began to assemble near the border, hundreds of tanks, thousands of soldiers, and elite Republican Guard divisions ready for war. Intelligence agencies noticed, but few believed he would truly invade. Then, in the early hours of August 2, 1990, Saddam gave the order. His armored columns roared across the desert, overwhelming Kuwait's small defense forces within hours. By sunrise, Iraqi troops had captured Kuwait City, and Saddam's flag flew over the oil fields he long coveted. The world was stunned. Western capitals condemned the invasion, while Saddam proclaimed it a revolutionary act of unity. He renamed Kuwait the 19th province of Iraq, daring anyone to challenge him. In Baghdad, the propaganda machine celebrated victory, but Saddam's ambitions had crossed a line the world would not ignore. The United Nations condemned the invasion, and US President George H.W. Bush declared that Saddam's aggression will not stand. For the first time since Vietnam, America prepared to lead a massive military coalition. The desert was about to witness one of the most decisive and technologically advanced wars in modern history, a clash between old-world tyranny and a new era of global power. Before dawn broke on August 2, 1990, the sands of the Kuwaiti desert trembled beneath the treads of hundreds of Iraqi tanks. The 1st and 5th Mechanized Divisions surged forward with mechanical precision, led by the elite Republican Guard. Their orders were absolute: take Kuwait, capture its rulers, and secure the oil fields by sunrise. The assault was swift, brutal, and overwhelming. Kuwaiti border posts were crushed in minutes, their defenders hopelessly outgunned. Iraqi MiG fighters streaked overhead, striking military bases and cutting off any chance of organized resistance. In less than 4 hours, Iraqi troops reached the outskirts of Kuwait City. The Kuwaiti army, though courageous, was outmatched in every sense. Their numbers were small, their equipment outdated, and communication lines shattered by the speed of the invasion. Columns of Iraqi tanks rolled through the capital's streets as frightened civilians fled or hid in their homes. Smoke rose from burning vehicles, and the air was filled with the deafening sound of artillery. By mid-morning, the royal palace was surrounded. Members of Kuwait's ruling Al-Sabah family barely escaped with their lives, fleeing into Saudi Arabia under the cover of night. For them, exile was survival. For Saddam, it was victory. In Baghdad, the news of conquest was met with roaring celebration. State television broadcast images of Iraqi soldiers raising their flag over government buildings, calling it a liberation from corrupt monarchs and Western puppets. Saddam appeared on screen, calm and defiant, announcing that Kuwait had ceased to exist. He declared it the 19th province of Iraq, claiming it was rightfully part of Iraqi territory stolen by British colonial borders decades earlier. The move was both strategic and symbolic. With Kuwait under his control, Saddam now commanded nearly 20% of the world's oil reserves, enough power to influence the global economy itself. But the world was not celebrating. Within hours, international condemnation poured in from every major capital. The United Nations convened an emergency session, and within days, Resolution 660 demanded Iraq's immediate withdrawal. The Arab League, long wary of internal conflict, was divided. Some nations quietly sympathized with Saddam's anti-Western stance, but most saw the invasion as an unforgivable act of aggression. Egypt and Saudi Arabia, fearing that Iraq might not stop at Kuwait, began pushing for a unified military response. The Middle East trembled at the thought of another all-out war. In Washington, President George H.W. Bush faced the first true test of the post-Cold War order. The American public was still weary from Vietnam, yet the images from Kuwait were impossible to ignore. Burning oil wells, looted stores, and terrified civilians filled the evening news. The occupation quickly turned brutal. Iraqi troops seized banks, raided embassies, and took thousands of foreign nationals as hostages, human shields against airstrikes. Reports emerged of executions, torture, and the systematic plundering of Kuwaiti wealth. Saddam's forces dismantled factories, emptied gold reserves, and stripped the country of everything valuable. Bush's advisors debated the response. Some urged caution, arguing the U.S. should focus on diplomacy. Others, led by Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and General Colin Powell, believed in decisive military action. For them, the message was simple: aggression must be stopped before it spreads. On August 7, 1990, the U.S. launched Operation Desert Shield, the largest military deployment since Vietnam. American troops began landing in Saudi Arabia, tasked with defending it from a potential Iraqi invasion. The world watched as cargo planes unloaded tanks, armored vehicles, and thousands of soldiers into the burning desert heat. Meanwhile, Saddam tried to solidify his control. He offered amnesty to captured Kuwaiti soldiers, forced loyalty pledges from local officials, and flooded the airwaves with propaganda. His speeches thundered with defiance, portraying himself as a hero standing against Western imperialism. But behind the bravado, his regime was nervous. Economic sanctions began to bite. The United Nations imposed a total trade embargo, freezing Iraqi assets and cutting off vital imports. Baghdad's streets grew quiet as uncertainty spread. Even Saddam's allies, Jordan, Yemen, and the Palestine Liberation Organization, were under immense pressure to distance themselves from him. The occupation dragged on, and the situation worsened. Oil prices surged, global markets shook, and the refugee crisis deepened as hundreds of thousands fled Kuwait. Families were torn apart, and entire neighborhoods were turned into fortified zones patrolled by Iraqi troops. Western journalists smuggled footage out of the city, showing looting, resistance, and executions. The world's patience was running out. The U.S. Navy moved into the Persian Gulf, and carrier groups prepared for air operations. Warships lined the horizon like steel predators waiting for the order to strike. As summer turned to autumn, diplomacy faltered. Multiple Arab leaders attempted to mediate, but Saddam refused to withdraw. He believed the West would never risk a direct confrontation in the Middle East. To him, Iraq's army was invincible, battle-tested, hardened by years of war, and commanded by loyalty rather than fear. But across the desert, a new kind of army was assembling, one equipped with precision technology, satellite reconnaissance, and global firepower unlike anything the world had seen. The confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. By late 1990, the lines were drawn. Iraq stood defiant, occupying Kuwait in the name of Arab unity. The United States and its allies stood ready to liberate it in the name of international law. The tension between the two worlds, one rooted in tyranny and the other in global order, was about to explode into the first major conflict of the post-Cold War era. The invasion of Kuwait had changed everything. What began as a gamble for oil and power was about to unleash a storm that would sweep across the desert, ignite the skies, and forever reshape the course of modern warfare. The invasion of Kuwait sent shockwaves through every capital in the world. Within days, Iraq found itself isolated, condemned, and cornered by a rising tide of global outrage. The United Nations moved quickly, passing resolution after resolution that demanded Saddam's immediate withdrawal. But he ignored them all. His speeches grew louder, his threats bolder. In Baghdad's crowded squares, his portrait towered above the people like a god king, while his generals prepared for the inevitable confrontation that loomed across the horizon. The age of diplomacy was fading, and the world was preparing for war. In Washington, President George H.W. Bush gathered his advisors in the Situation Room. For the United States, this was more than an invasion of a small, oil-rich nation. It was a challenge to the very concept of world order that had emerged after the Cold War. If Saddam was allowed to keep Kuwait, it would send a message that aggression could be rewarded. Bush vowed that the invasion would not stand. His administration began the long and difficult task of building a global coalition. Diplomacy became a weapon, and Secretary of State James Baker traveled from capital to capital, forging alliances, negotiating troop commitments, and convincing skeptical nations that this was not just America's war, it was the world's. At the United Nations, the diplomatic battle intensified. Resolution 661 imposed sweeping economic sanctions on Iraq, freezing its assets and banning all trade. For the first time in decades, the Security Council was nearly unanimous. The Soviet Union, weakened and struggling internally, reluctantly sided with the West. China remained cautious but did not obstruct the effort. Even many Arab nations joined in, stunned by the audacity of Saddam's actions. Egypt, Syria, and Saudi Arabia, long divided by ideology, found themselves on the same side. It was an alliance no one could have predicted, united not by friendship, but by fear. As the weeks passed, Operation Desert Shield transformed the deserts of Saudi Arabia into the most heavily fortified region on Earth. American troops poured in by the tens of thousands, joined by soldiers from Britain, France, Canada, and dozens of other countries. By the end of the year, over 500,000 coalition troops were stationed along the Saudi border, their tanks lined up in endless rows, their aircraft gleaming under the desert sun. The logistical effort was staggering. Miles of supply lines, mobile hospitals, airfields, and entire cities of tents built in the middle of nowhere. The world's most advanced military machine was taking shape, and every move was watched by nervous eyes in Baghdad. Saddam responded with bluster and threats. He announced that Kuwait was permanently annexed and declared that any attack on Iraq would be the mother of all battles. His regime broadcast images of captured Western hostages, paraded before cameras to deter airstrikes. He hinted that Iraq might use chemical weapons, reminding the world of the horrors unleashed during the war with Iran. To many, Saddam seemed irrational, even suicidal, but to those who knew his methods, it was clear he was playing for time. He hoped to fracture the coalition, to turn Arab states against the West, and to exploit the divisions that always lay beneath international unity. But the coalition held firm. Behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia allowed its territory to serve as the launching point for any future offensive. Egypt committed tens of thousands of troops, hoping to restore its standing as a regional power. Even Syria, historically aligned with Moscow, and once hostile to Washington, joined the alliance. It was a rare moment when the world spoke with one voice, and for Saddam, that voice grew louder each passing day. Still, he refused to yield. He dismissed the deadlines set by the United Nations, believing that America would never risk massive casualties in another foreign war. His confidence bordered on delusion. In New York, the Security Council passed Resolution 678, setting January 15, 1991, as the final deadline for Iraq to withdraw from Kuwait. If Saddam failed to comply, member nations were authorized to use all necessary means to enforce the resolution. The clock began to tick, and the world braced for impact. As the deadline approached, diplomats made desperate last-minute appeals. The French proposed compromises, the Soviets urged restraint, and Arab mediators pleaded for peace. But Saddam answered only with silence and defiance. He appeared on television in military uniform, vowing that Iraq would fight to the last man. In the deserts of Saudi Arabia, soldiers waited under the scorching sun, their routines a mixture of monotony and tension. Pilots trained for night raids, engineers laid runways, and commanders planned the coming storm with mathematical precision. Journalists camped nearby, their cameras ready to capture every moment of what would become the most televised war in history. Across the ocean, families watched the news in silence as the number of troops overseas grew by the day. The fear of another long and bloody conflict lingered, but this time, America was determined to fight differently. While the world's attention was fixed on the military buildup, a quieter battle was unfolding, one of intelligence, technology, and deception. Satellites tracked Iraqi movements with pinpoint accuracy. Stealth aircraft conducted reconnaissance missions deep inside Iraqi territory, unseen and unheard. Psychological warfare began to shape the battlefield before a single shot was fired. Leaflets rained down over Iraqi positions, urging soldiers to surrender. Radio broadcasts spread confusion among commanders. Every part of Saddam's army was being watched, mapped, and prepared for destruction. As the new year approached, the air was thick with anticipation. The final warnings were issued, the deadline set. Saddam Hussein stood defiant, convinced that he could endure whatever the coalition threw at him. In his mind, Iraq had survived worse. But he underestimated the scale of what was coming. Across the desert, engines roared, missiles were loaded, and pilots memorized their targets. The United States and its allies were ready. The time for negotiation had ended. The storm was about to begin, and the desert would soon erupt with fire, steel, and thunder. The opening act of the most decisive war the modern Middle East had ever seen. The deserts of Saudi Arabia were no longer silent. By January 1991, they had become a living fortress, a city of tents, airfields, and steel. The buildup under Operation Desert Shield had reached its peak. Over 500,000 U.S. troops stood ready alongside allies from Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and more than 30 nations. It was a force unlike any the modern world had seen, a coalition united by necessity, bound by one clear objective: to drive Iraq out of Kuwait. The soldiers trained under the blistering sun, their equipment humming with readiness. The skies above were thick with the rumble of bombers and the distant echo of engines as the world's most advanced war machine waited for the signal to strike. For months, coalition planners had studied every inch of Iraq's defenses. Saddam's army was immense, more than 1 million strong, with thousands of tanks, artillery batteries, and surface-to-air missiles, but many of those troops were exhausted from years of war, underfed, and poorly motivated. The elite Republican Guard was another story. Battle-hardened, fiercely loyal, and stationed deep inside Iraq to defend Baghdad and the regime itself. Saddam believed his army's numbers would hold the line, and that the coalition would bleed in the desert like so many before. But what he could not foresee was how the next phase of war would unfold. It would not be a slow, grinding battle of attrition. It would be a storm of precision, technology, and overwhelming force. As January 15, 1991 arrived, Saddam ignored the final United Nations deadline. The world held its breath. Diplomats made one last plea for peace. But it was too late. On January 16th, President George H.W. Bush appeared before cameras and announced that the liberation of Kuwait had begun. At exactly 2:38 a.m. Baghdad time, the night sky over Iraq erupted in light. Cruise missiles streaked through the air, their tails glowing like comets as they arced toward their targets. From stealth bombers invisible to radar, precision-guided bombs fell on Iraqi command centers, airfields, and radar stations. The operation had a name that would soon become legend: Desert Storm. The opening salvo was unlike anything seen before. Within minutes, Iraq's air defense network was blinded. Communications failed, and command posts were reduced to rubble. Coalition pilots flew thousands of sorties in the first 24 hours, striking military installations with uncanny precision. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, once shrouded in secrecy, made its combat debut, slipping through Iraqi radar undetected and striking the heart of Baghdad with surgical accuracy. Television cameras captured the eerie green glow of anti-aircraft fire streaking through the night as the city shook under waves of explosions. CNN broadcast it live to millions, making this the first war seen in real time by the entire world. In Baghdad, chaos reigned. Power stations were destroyed, bridges collapsed, and airbases turned to smoking craters. Iraqi pilots who managed to take off were quickly intercepted and shot down. Dozens fled to Iran, seeking refuge rather than certain death in the skies. On the ground, confusion spread through the ranks. Saddam's generals struggled to communicate as coalition electronic warfare units jammed their frequencies. Entire divisions sat paralyzed, unaware of where the next strike would land. To the coalition, it was the most successful opening campaign imaginable. To Iraq, it was the beginning of collapse. The scale of the air campaign was staggering. For 6 relentless weeks, more than 100,000 sorties were flown. Bombers hit everything from missile launchers and ammunition depots to oil refineries and supply lines. Smart bombs, guided by lasers and satellites, rained down with pinpoint precision. Iraq's infrastructure disintegrated, its economy crippled overnight. Highways turned into graveyards of twisted metal as convoys were obliterated from above. The coalition sought to minimize civilian casualties, but the intensity of the strikes left no corner of the nation untouched. Entire neighborhoods in Baghdad were left without power or water. The war in the air was unlike anything the modern world had ever seen. From the moment Operation Desert Storm began, the skies over Iraq became a theater of precision, power, and domination. Coalition aircraft flew day and night, a relentless storm of steel and fire that never ceased. In the first hours alone, over 1,000 sorties were launched. By dawn, Iraq's air defense network, once thought to be one of the strongest in the Middle East, was in ruins. Command bunkers were obliterated, radar sites silenced, and missile batteries burned under the intensity of laser-guided bombs. The air campaign was not just the first phase of war, it was the war's defining weapon. The strategy was simple in principle but revolutionary in execution. Coalition forces sought to paralyze Iraq before the ground assault even began. Every strike had a purpose, every target a role in dismantling Saddam's war machine. Bridges, communication lines, and military installations were targeted with precision unseen in previous conflicts. American F-117 Nighthawks, cloaked in radar-absorbing stealth technology, slipped through Iraqi defenses to hit command centers in the heart of Baghdad. Their strikes were so accurate that entire operations were coordinated in real time using satellite imagery. For the first time, war had gone digital. The coalition's pilots did not fight blind. They fought guided by the eyes of space. The Iraqis tried to resist. Anti-aircraft guns roared into the night sky, tracing arcs of green and red light as tracers chased invisible enemies. Surface-to-air missiles launched by the hundreds, many guided by radar that was already jammed or destroyed. Iraqi MiGs scrambled to intercept, but they were outmatched. US F-15 Eagles and British Tornadoes swept them aside, dominating the skies with absolute superiority. In a matter of days, the Iraqi Air Force ceased to exist as a fighting force. The few pilots who survived fled across the border into Iran, leaving their aircraft behind in surrender. From orbit, satellites watched as Iraq's infrastructure crumbled. Entire oil refineries were turned into infernos, their black smoke curling thousands of feet into the sky. Supply depots exploded in fiery waves that lit up the desert night. Power stations were reduced to ashes, cutting electricity to entire cities. Iraqi command posts fell silent, and even Saddam's elite Republican Guard found themselves isolated, unable to communicate or resupply. The precision bombing was so thorough that it dismantled not just the army, but the nation's ability to function. Baghdad, once the symbol of Arab power, sat in darkness, its streets empty, its people terrified, its government paralyzed. Yet the bombing was not without tragedy. Despite efforts to limit civilian casualties, mistakes were made. Missiles went astray. A shelter in Baghdad was struck, killing hundreds of civilians. The images of burned and bloodied survivors flashed across television screens around the world. Iraq used the tragedy as propaganda, showing it as proof of Western cruelty, but even that could not halt the coalition's momentum. Every night, the skies lit up again as another wave of bombers crossed into enemy territory. The sheer intensity of the air campaign broke Iraq's will long before the ground forces arrived. Saddam's answer was desperation. He ordered Scud missile strikes against Israel and Saudi Arabia, hoping to divide the coalition by provoking an Israeli retaliation. The missiles roared across the sky, striking Tel Aviv and Riyadh, killing civilians and spreading fear. The world held its breath, waiting to see if Israel would strike back. But under US persuasion, it did not. American Patriot missile batteries raced to intercept the Scuds, their white trails streaking upward in bright arcs before colliding in midair. Though not every intercept succeeded, the psychological victory was immense. The coalition held together, united in purpose. The air war also became a battle of endurance. Coalition pilots faced intense danger every mission, flak exploding around them, missiles locking onto their signatures, and long flights across hostile terrain. Many aircraft returned scarred by shrapnel, and some did not return at all. Downed pilots who survived in enemy territory were captured and paraded on television, battered and bruised, forced to confess under duress. Their images were used by Iraqi propaganda to project strength, but in reality, those few captures were isolated incidents in a war dominated by coalition control. The losses, though tragic, did not slow the campaign. As the weeks passed, the statistics told the story of devastation. More than 88,000 tons of bombs were dropped, targeting over 30,000 Iraqi positions. The coalition destroyed radar stations, ammunition depots, missile silos, and armored columns with near-total accuracy. Iraqi armor formations were shattered before they could even move. Convoys trying to resupply forward positions were annihilated from the air. Saddam's army, once the fourth largest in the world, was being systematically dismantled without the coalition having to commit ground troops. The psychological effect was overwhelming. Desertion rates skyrocketed. Entire divisions abandoned their vehicles and fled into the desert. Soldiers waved white flags, desperate to survive. Inside Baghdad, Saddam remained defiant. Surrounded by loyal officers and layers of security, he dismissed reports of defeat as lies. His speeches called for martyrdom and resistance, but the people no longer believed. They endured the bombings in silence, waiting for the nightmare to end. Iraqi state television continued to show scenes of supposed victory, even as smoke rose over the capital. The illusion of control was crumbling, and Saddam's once fearsome regime was beginning to rot from within. For the coalition, success was measured in precision and patience. The strategy was working perfectly. Iraq's military was paralyzed, its infrastructure crippled, and its morale shattered. General Schwarzkopf and his commanders studied the damage reports with satisfaction. The time for air power alone was ending. Now the coalition had total control of the skies, and the path to Kuwait lay open. By mid-February, after 6 relentless weeks of bombardment, the coalition command gave the order to prepare for the ground offensive. The objectives were clear: liberate Kuwait, destroy the remaining Iraqi forces, and end the occupation once and for all. The air war had paved the way. The enemy was blinded, broken, and demoralized. The storm from above had done its job. What remained would be decided on the ground, in a campaign that would last only 100 hours, but would forever change the face of modern warfare. The ground war began on February 24, 1991, under a moonless desert sky. Coalition forces had waited for this moment with anticipation and precision. After weeks of relentless bombing, the enemy's defenses were fractured, communication lines severed, and morale all but gone. The soldiers who now crossed into Kuwait and southern Iraq were not walking into chaos. They were stepping into a battlefield meticulously prepared for their advance. Operation Desert Sabre had begun, and it would unfold faster than anyone could have imagined. The ground assault was a masterstroke of speed and coordination. On the right flank, U.S. Marines advanced directly toward Kuwait City, supported by British and Arab forces. Their mission was clear: drive out the Iraqi troops entrenched along the coast and liberate the city. On the left flank, the U.S. Army's 7th Corps and 18th Airborne Corps executed one of the most audacious maneuvers in modern warfare, a massive sweep across the western desert, flanking Iraqi defenses from behind. It was the very definition of a left hook, designed to trap Saddam's elite Republican Guard and cut off their retreat. The Iraqi front lines, weakened by weeks of airstrikes, offered little resistance. Soldiers surrendered in droves, emerging from bunkers with white flags, terrified and exhausted. They were hungry, dehydrated, and demoralized, often unaware of the full scale of the coalition's power. In some areas, entire battalions gave up without firing a shot. Yet not all the fighting was bloodless. In key positions, especially around Kuwait's oil fields and along defensive ridges, Iraqi troops fought fiercely, determined to delay the inevitable. The coalition responded with overwhelming firepower. Artillery thundered, tanks advanced through burning dunes, and air support remained constant overhead. In the western desert, the U.S. Army's left hook moved with astonishing speed. The 101st Airborne Division, using helicopters, leapfrogged deep into Iraqi territory, cutting off supply lines. The 3rd Armored Division and the 1st Infantry Division followed, forming a wall of steel that swept north and east. The scale of the maneuver was staggering. Hundreds of miles of desert covered in less than a day, entire divisions moving as one seamless machine. Iraqi forces never saw it coming. By the time they realized the trap closing around them, it was too late. The Battle of Al-Busayya marked one of the first major confrontations. American armor clashed with entrenched Iraqi tanks, and the result was swift. Coalition firepower tore through enemy lines, leaving smoking wrecks scattered across the sand. The M1A1 Abrams tank proved unstoppable, its range, accuracy, and armor far surpassing Iraq's Soviet-built T-72s. In less than an hour, the Iraqi positions were overrun. Similar victories followed at Al-Talil, Jalab, and along the infamous Highway 8. Coalition forces advanced relentlessly, capturing thousands of prisoners and destroying what remained of Iraq's forward defenses. Further east, the Marines were pushing into Kuwait itself. The landscape was a vision of apocalyptic destruction. Iraqi troops, retreating under pressure, set fire to hundreds of oil wells. Black smoke billowed into the sky, turning day into night and coating everything in soot. The air was thick with the stench of burning crude. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the horizon glowed an eerie orange. Amid this inferno, the Marines pressed forward. They fought through minefields, trenches, and booby traps, often under the cover of choking smoke. It was grueling, dirty, and dangerous, but nothing could stop the advance. On the western flank, the Republican Guard finally made their stand. These were Saddam's best troops, well-trained, heavily armed, and fiercely loyal. They fought back with determination, but they faced a coalition force that was technologically superior and tactically flawless. The Battle of Medina Ridge became the largest tank engagement of the war. Hundreds of tanks clashed across open desert, their shells streaking through the haze. Coalition tanks moved with precision, targeting enemies beyond visual range. The results were devastating. In a matter of hours, the Republican Guard's elite divisions were annihilated, their vehicles burning, their formations shattered. As the Iraqi defense collapsed, retreat turned into chaos. Soldiers fled north toward Basra, abandoning their weapons and vehicles. Many tried to escape along Highway 80, a 6-lane road leading from Kuwait to Iraq. What followed became one of the war's most haunting images. Coalition aircraft struck the fleeing columns, destroying hundreds of vehicles in a single night. Burned-out tanks, trucks, and buses littered the road, a scene that would later be known as the Highway of Death. It was a grim reminder of the war's brutality, even as victory drew near. By February 26th, just 2 days after the ground assault began, coalition forces had reached the outskirts of Kuwait City. The Iraqi army was in full retreat, and liberation was imminent. Kuwaiti resistance fighters, who had endured months of occupation, emerged to guide coalition troops through the wreckage. Together, they reclaimed their capital. The Kuwaiti flag was raised once more over the city, tattered but defiant. Civilians wept in the streets, waving the flags of nations that had come to their aid. The liberation of Kuwait was complete. That same night, Saddam Hussein gave the order to withdraw completely. His dream of regional dominance lay in ruins. His army, once feared, was broken. Tens of thousands of his soldiers were dead, captured, or missing. The coalition had achieved in 100 hours what had once seemed impossible. General Schwarzkopf and his commanders, watching from their headquarters, declared victory. The operation was over. When the guns finally fell silent, the scale of the coalition's success was unprecedented. Over 100 hours of ground combat had destroyed more than half of Iraq's armored forces, while coalition casualties remained astonishingly low. The precision, coordination, and overwhelming technological advantage had rewritten the playbook of modern warfare. For the United States and its allies, it was proof that the new era of military dominance had begun. For Iraq, it was the beginning of humiliation, isolation, and years of suffering yet to come. The storm had passed, but its shadow would linger for decades. The ceasefire came on February 28, 1991. Just 100 hours after the ground war had begun, coalition forces had achieved what many had thought impossible. Kuwait was liberated, Saddam Hussein's army was shattered, and the might of the world's most advanced military had been demonstrated in full. The desert was silent now, save for the smoke rising from burned-out tanks, abandoned vehicles, and the hundreds of oil wells set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces. The devastation was immense, yet for the coalition and the people of Kuwait, it was a moment of triumph, relief, and hard-won victory. President George H.W. Bush addressed the world from the White House, declaring a decisive victory and urging restraint. He praised the coalition forces, emphasizing that the mission had been to restore international law, protect innocent lives, and liberate Kuwait, not to topple Saddam Hussein. For the first time in decades, America had fought a war with overwhelming technology, air dominance, and near-total global support. On the streets of Washington, London, Paris, and Riyadh, people celebrated. Flags waved, crowds cheered, and television broadcasts replayed images of coalition soldiers raising the Kuwaiti flag over the liberated capital. For Kuwait, the victory was bittersweet. The city lay in ruins. Government buildings had been looted, infrastructure destroyed, and homes reduced to rubble. The retreating Iraqi forces had deliberately sabotaged utilities and communications, and the oil fields were engulfed in flames. The environmental damage was catastrophic, with hundreds of oil wells burning and millions of barrels of crude spilling across the desert. Civilians returned to their homes amid devastation, but there was hope. Liberation had come, and the monarchy, though exiled for months, reclaimed its rightful place. For Iraq, the aftermath was grim. Saddam Hussein remained in power, but his army was in ruins. The Republican Guard, once the pride of Iraq, had been decimated. Tens of thousands of soldiers were dead, missing, or taken prisoner. Tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery had been destroyed in the air campaign and during the ground offensive. The army that had once seemed invincible was now broken, demoralized, and incapable of defending the country. Even the elite units that survived were exhausted, scattered, and cut off from effective command. Saddam's dreams of regional conquest had been crushed in a matter of weeks. The coalition's victory did not bring immediate peace. Saddam suppressed uprisings in southern and northern Iraq, brutally crushing dissent among the Shiite and Kurdish populations. Entire cities rose in rebellion, inspired by coalition success, only to be met with overwhelming force. Helicopters strafed streets, tanks fired on neighborhoods, and thousands were executed. The international community, while celebrating Kuwait's liberation, condemned the atrocities but offered little direct intervention. Saddam Hussein remained defiant, ruling a country battered by war, sanctions, and internal rebellion, yet unbowed and unwilling to relinquish power. Economic sanctions were imposed immediately. Iraq's oil revenues were frozen, imports strictly controlled, and trade heavily restricted. The goal was clear: to limit Saddam's ability to rebuild his military, to pressure him politically, and to maintain a fragile balance in the region. No-fly zones were established over the north and south of Iraq to protect the Kurdish and Shiite populations. These measures, though effective in preventing large-scale military aggression, created long-term suffering for the Iraqi population. Hospitals, schools, and basic services struggled under sanctions, and the country faced years of economic hardship. The environmental devastation of the war also lingered. Hundreds of oil wells set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces burned for months, creating choking black smoke that polluted the air and scorched the land. The desert itself became a scarred landscape of blackened sand, ruined vehicles, and remnants of a conflict that had moved with terrifying speed. Cleanup would take years, and the scars of war were a constant reminder of the destructive power unleashed during the conflict. Despite the destruction, the coalition had proven a point. Modern warfare had changed. Precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, satellite reconnaissance, and coordinated multinational forces had delivered victory with minimal coalition casualties. Traditional massed infantry assaults were no longer the dominant strategy. For military strategists worldwide, the Gulf War became a textbook example of how technology, planning, and logistics could shape the battlefield and achieve objectives with unprecedented efficiency. In Kuwait, reconstruction began almost immediately. Coalition engineers repaired roads, restored electricity, and helped extinguish the last of the burning oil wells. International aid poured in, and Kuwaitis began to rebuild their homes, businesses, and infrastructure. The war had been short, but its impact was long-lasting. Civilians had endured occupation, looting, and terror, yet they had survived. The streets of Kuwait City gradually returned to life, though reminders of the destruction were everywhere. Burned-out vehicles, blackened buildings, and oil-slicked sands marking the scars of occupation and war. For the world, the Gulf War set a precedent. It demonstrated the United States' role as a global enforcer, capable of leading a coalition to victory with overwhelming technology and firepower. It proved that international coalitions could succeed when nations acted in unison to enforce international law. Yet it also revealed the limits of military intervention. Saddam Hussein remained in power, the Iraqi people suffered under sanctions, and the seeds of future conflict were already planted. The war was over, but the consequences were only beginning to unfold. In the end, Operation Desert Storm was a triumph of strategy, technology, and diplomacy. It restored Kuwait to its rightful rulers, crippled one of the region's most aggressive militaries, and showcased the effectiveness of modern warfare. But it also left a legacy of destruction, political instability, and humanitarian challenges. The desert had been cleared of invading forces, yet the storm of consequences, political, social, and environmental, would continue to shape the Middle East for decades to come. The Gulf War officially ended with the signing of the ceasefire, but the echoes of conflict reverberated long after the last shots were fired. For Kuwait, Freedom had been restored, yet the scars of occupation were everywhere. Streets were littered with debris, oil fires had blackened the horizon, and entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. Citizens returned cautiously to their homes, witnessing firsthand the devastation left by retreating Iraqi forces. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, businesses struggled to reopen, and infrastructure required years of rebuilding. Liberation had come at a cost, but it was a victory hard-won and deeply felt. For Iraq, the aftermath was a time of humiliation, desperation, and reprisal. Saddam Hussein remained in power, but his once formidable army was shattered, his ambitions for regional dominance crushed. Republican Guard units were decimated, armored divisions destroyed, and thousands of soldiers captured or killed. The economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations further isolated the country, restricting oil exports, limiting imports, and freezing assets abroad. Iraq's population suffered greatly under these restrictions, with hospitals, schools, and basic services severely hampered. Saddam's regime, though still brutal, had been weakened and forced to focus on internal control rather than external conquest. The coalition forces, meanwhile, returned home, hailed as heroes. The United States, leading the operation, demonstrated its technological and logistical superiority on a global stage. Precision-guided munitions, stealth aircraft, and satellite intelligence had delivered a rapid, decisive victory with minimal casualties. The war redefined modern military strategy and showcased the importance of air supremacy, electronic warfare, and multinational coordination. Soldiers returned to their countries amid parades, ceremonies, and widespread public admiration. The Gulf War became a symbol of what could be achieved when planning, technology, and international cooperation aligned perfectly. Yet the war left behind complex political and social consequences. Saddam Hussein's brutal suppression of uprisings in the south and north of Iraq, targeting Shiite and Kurdish populations, highlighted the ongoing challenges of governance and regional stability. No-fly zones were established over these regions to protect civilians, creating a tenuous balance that lasted for years. The international community, while celebrating the coalition's victory, recognized that the region's long-term peace remained fragile. The seeds of future conflicts had been sown, as resentment, oppression, and geopolitical tensions simmered beneath the surface. The environmental impact of the war was another enduring legacy. Retreating Iraqi forces had set fire to over 600 oil wells, releasing millions of barrels of crude into the desert and the atmosphere. The resulting black smoke covered the sky for months, contaminating soil and water and creating long-lasting ecological damage. The destruction of Kuwait's oil infrastructure not only caused environmental disaster, but also had economic implications for the region and the global oil market. Cleanup and recovery efforts required international cooperation and years of labor to restore stability to the ecosystem. For the people of Kuwait, rebuilding became a national mission. With the support of coalition allies and international aid, roads were repaired, electricity restored, and the remaining oil fires extinguished. Citizens worked tirelessly to restore their homes, businesses, and schools. The monarchy returned to full authority, and government services gradually resumed. Despite the trauma of occupation, Kuwaitis celebrated their liberation with renewed determination, grateful for the coalition's intervention and hopeful for a future of peace and prosperity. The war also transformed the perception of global power. The United States emerged as the dominant military force, capable of mobilizing vast resources and commanding international coalitions with unprecedented speed. Other nations observed and learned from the strategies employed, understanding that modern warfare had shifted toward precision, technology, and rapid maneuver. The Gulf Wars set the template for conflicts to come, illustrating both the effectiveness and limitations of military intervention. It underscored the importance of diplomacy, planning, and multinational cooperation in maintaining regional stability. While the battlefield was silent, the human stories continued. Soldiers who had witnessed the horrors of war returned home, carrying memories of friends lost, civilians rescued, and battles fought with precision and courage. Families reunited, communities healed, and nations reflected on the cost of conflict. The Gulf War had been swift and decisive, but its lessons extended far beyond the deserts of Kuwait and Iraq, shaping military doctrine, international relations, and the consciousness of a generation. In the end, the Gulf War was a watershed moment in modern history. It demonstrated the devastating power of technology, the necessity of coalition unity, and the fragility of regional ambitions unchecked by international law. Kuwait was free, Saddam remained in power but weakened, and the world had witnessed a new era of warfare. The legacy of the conflict endured, not just in politics, military strategy, or technology, but in the lives of those who survived, the landscape scarred by fire and oil, and the lessons etched indelibly into the history of the Middle East. The storm had passed, but its impact would be felt for decades to come, a reminder of the destructive force of ambition and the fragile balance of peace. The Gulf War left the world forever changed. In less than a year, a small but determined coalition had confronted the ambitions of one of the region's most formidable powers and emerged victorious. Kuwait was liberated, Saddam Hussein's military might was shattered, and the dominance of precision technology in modern warfare had been firmly established. The war had demonstrated that careful planning, international cooperation, and overwhelming force could achieve swift and decisive results. For the United States, it was a moment of unambiguous success, proving its role as the world's leading military power and setting the stage for future engagements in the post-Cold War era. Yet victory came at a cost. The deserts of Kuwait and southern Iraq bore the scars of mechanized warfare, airstrikes, and deliberate destruction. Hundreds of oil wells had been set ablaze by retreating Iraqi forces, sending black plumes of smoke into the sky and causing ecological damage that would take years to repair. Roads, bridges, and cities had been reduced to rubble, and thousands of civilians had been killed or displaced. While coalition casualties were relatively low, the human toll for Iraq and occupied Kuwait was profound. Families mourned lost loved ones, communities were torn apart, and the landscape itself was transformed into a testament to the war's destructive power. In Iraq, the aftermath was grim and complex. Saddam Hussein retained power, but his army was crippled, his economy devastated, and his international standing diminished. The regime turned inward, brutally suppressing uprisings by the Shiite and Kurdish populations, and consolidating control over a traumatized nation. Economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations restricted oil exports, limited imports, and froze Iraqi assets abroad. The population suffered as hospitals, schools, and infrastructure struggled to function under severe shortages. The seeds of future conflict were sown in this environment, creating a legacy of resentment and instability that would shape the region for decades. The coalition, by contrast, had demonstrated the potential of modern warfare. The integration of satellite intelligence, stealth technology, precision-guided munitions, and multinational coordination had created a battlefield where technological superiority and planning could dictate outcomes with unprecedented speed. Commanders like General Norman Schwarzkopf executed maneuvers with surgical precision, while soldiers across nations worked in unison, exemplifying the power of cooperation and strategy. The Gulf War became a benchmark for military operations, influencing tactics, planning, and doctrine in conflicts that followed. For Kuwait, the war was both liberation and reckoning. Citizens returned to their city to rebuild homes, businesses, and institutions. The monarchy resumed authority, guiding reconstruction efforts and restoring national stability. International aid poured in, and the citizens worked tirelessly to reclaim a sense of normalcy. The horrors of occupation, looting, violence, and environmental destruction left lasting memories. But the resilience of the Kuwaiti people proved that recovery was possible. The restoration of sovereignty was a moment of profound relief and pride, a testament to the importance of international solidarity and decisive action. The Gulf War also reshaped global geopolitics. The success of the coalition reaffirmed the principle that aggression would not go unchecked, reinforcing international law and collective security. Nations witnessed the United States' capacity to lead and coordinate vast multinational operations, redefining the global balance of power. Yet it also highlighted the limitations of military intervention. Saddam remained in power, civilian populations endured hardship under sanctions, and regional tensions continued to simmer. The lessons of the war were clear. Decisive military action could achieve rapid results, but long-term stability required diplomacy, oversight, and vigilance. Ultimately, The Gulf War was a story of contrasts, victory and devastation, liberation and oppression, technology and human cost. It was a conflict that unfolded with unprecedented speed, demonstrating the evolution of modern warfare and the fragility of regional power. The storm had passed, leaving behind a changed Middle East, nations scarred yet resilient, and a world keenly aware of the power of international coalitions and technological superiority. The legacy of the Gulf War endures, not only in history books or military doctrine, but in the lives of those who experienced it, the landscapes marked by fire and oil, and the enduring lesson that ambition unchecked can spark a storm whose effects ripple across generations. The Gulf War was over, but its story would echo through time as a testament to courage, strategy, and the enduring struggle for peace.